This championship is back on. I can say with a lot of confidence that both McLaren cars will be disqualified from the Las Vegas Grand Prix that just happened this morning. Following the Grand Prix, both had their rear titanium skid blocks measured, which is pretty normal, and they failed. They were too thin, which is a disaster because it means an almost absolute disqualification for both cars. The report from the technical delegate came through just a few minutes after the race, and we can follow along. The skid wear of car numbers 81 and 04, that's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri if you didn't know, was checked. The rearmost skid was measured on both cars. And then next line, the measured thickness was less than 9 millimeters on both cars, which is the minimum thickness required. Now, I just want to say this is a black and white rule. That's why I feel confident making this video already. The news has not come out yet that they've definitely been disqualified, just that the thickness was too low. But this is an absolute guaranteed disqualification in my opinion. If you want to know how strict this rule is, Lewis Hamilton was disqualified for having excessive plank wear at the Chinese Grand Prix earlier this year. His plank was 8.6 millimeters when measured. Now keep in mind, 9 millimeters is the limit. So 0.6 of a millimeter off of his titanium skid block made the difference, and he was DSQ'd. The same thing happened to Hulkenberg in Bahrain, 8.4 millimeters, so again 0.6 of a millimeter. So if the technical delegate decided that McLaren's skid blocks are too thin, they're too thin. This is a black and white rule. It's kind of like with jump starts. We've seen it a few times where, for example, a car will just roll a centimeter over their white line in their grid box, and you know that they got absolutely no advantage from that, but it doesn't matter. It's a black and white rule. If you cross the line, you are out, and it's the same thing with this. If you are below 9 millimeters, you are disqualified from the race. The reason for this rule is pretty serious. This rule was actually introduced after Ayrton Senna died, and he died because his car had a failure. The failure was in the steering column, but the failure of the steering column was caused by the fact that the car was bottoming out. Now, essentially, Formula One cars are designed as such that they sort of suck themselves into the road. That's really what the ground effects era is all about, is you've got all these tunnels underneath the cars, and they suck the car down as low as possible. So having a car that's extremely low is highly beneficial for cornering, for example. But the problem is when you have a car that's really low and generates too much downforce, when you're going extremely fast on a straight, the car can bottom out. So that means that it presses into the ground so hard that it's actually like touching, it's actually pushing into the ground. And what that means is if you were to hit even the slightest bump, you have no suspension. Like, you know, you're bypassing your suspension. The bump is hitting the body of the car. And that obviously is extremely dangerous. What happened to Senna, of course, is that kind of impact, he was on cold tires at the time. It was a lot of different factors came into that. But one of the main factors is, of course, the car bottomed out and the steering column couldn't handle that pressure. So in any case, they implemented that rule following his death, and for that reason it's pretty serious. Now, of course, F1 teams want to try and get as close as possible to the limit in this regard. That's why we get the occasional disqualification. If there were nothing to be gained from running your car as low as possible, no one would ever do it. But there is a lot to gain, because the lower your car goes, as I say, the cornering is the advantage is pretty great. It also makes sense that Las Vegas would be a track where people would fail this skid block test, because Las Vegas is a track that has extremely high speeds. It's some of the fastest on the calendar with the extremely long straight. Everyone's running really, really skinny wings. So what does that mean? That means that the car is being crushed downwards more than it would be at your regular track, which means that your skid block is going to wear more than it usually would. So if you're running your car too low, you're going to be caught out in Vegas. I think it also makes sense that it's Vegas because they had limited running. This is usually something that a team would test thoroughly for in their free practice sessions, make sure that their ride height is not too low. But in this case, we had changeable conditions all throughout practice and qualifying. So I think that they had really limited information to go on. So McLaren made the mistake. I'll be totally honest, I'm very empathetic about the people at McLaren who will be affected by this, but I am thrilled with this news because this means championship back on. Let's have a look at the graphs. Okay, so prior to this race, prior to Las Vegas, we were on 390 points for Norris, 366 for Piastri, and 341 for Verstappen. Now, following this race, before the disqualification was announced, Norris would have gone up to 408, Piastri would have gone up to 378, and Verstappen would have gone up to 366. But now, taking this disqualification into account, Norris drops back to 390, Oscar drops back to 366, which means firstly, Verstappen and Piastri are equal on points, and secondly, Verstappen is now only 24 points behind Norris, which is less than a race win. Now, 24 points is not a really close gap. I mean, 24 points is still pretty tough, but I think it is possible. We have 3 events left, 2 feature races and 1 sprint. Max has been famously excellent at sprint races. Now, it should be said that Qatar and Abu Dhabi are kind of more McLaren tracks. I think that's pretty fair to say. But Verstappen is very much in the conversation again. Also remember that as the season gets later, certain aspects, certain components of the car, like the power units, for example, they are getting older, they're aging, they are not losing some of their efficacy. And that's not necessarily an issue for Verstappen because Verstappen just took a new power unit a few races ago. So what that means is that a DNF from a mechanical failure is much more likely for Norris or Piastri than it is for Verstappen at this point. So yes, it looked like the championship was over, but it is so back. I'm super pumped to see where this goes. I have a video coming out today about Russell and Antonelli, comparing the two of them, which I think is also a really interesting analysis. So subscribe if you want to see that. And thank you very much. Cheers.